I flew to Vancouver to look at a car I couldn't buy, and I came home with one I didn't expect. If you've been following along, 2 cars, 2 bore scoring inspections, 2 walkaways. I had a flight booked to pick up the second one, then Porsche called. 4 out of 6 cylinders done. I almost canceled the trip. If the ticket was already paid for, I kind of figured what was the point. However, before I made that call, I reached out to a car broker I'd been in contact with in Vancouver recently and wanted a second opinion on, and this broker mostly dealt with Porsches. I needed to see if this was just bad luck or if there was more going on here. So the broker I connected with, I don't have his permission to use his name, so I'm just gonna err on the side of caution and not share it with you today. But he originally caught my attention with one of his listings of a 2017 manual. We didn't really do a deal, but I really respected how well he handled himself and how honest he communicated. I basically explained, like, look, man, I've had two 991.1s both fail bore scopes at Porsche. Is this bad luck, or are all these cars like this? I also shared with this broker what the Porsche specialist in Vancouver had told me, and that was that pretty much every car they scope has some level of scuffing, scoring, or cylinder wear. So let that sit in for a second. A Porsche specialist in Vancouver that did my first inspection, the people who bore scope these cars for a living said pretty much every car has some sort of cylinder wall wear. I shared that with the broker, and his response was actually pretty measured and honest. The email the broker sent back to me said this: cylinder wall is an extremely, big capital letters, broad brush stroke. I have sold many a 997 and 991.1 Carrera with mild, faint cylinder wall wear. And despite this, they go on to live healthy and happy lives with no observed bore scoring symptoms. He gave me 3 options as I decided to look at what my choices were. 1, I could keep hunting for a 991.1 S model and accept that cylinder wear of some flavor is a reality. Just find the best example, maybe not a perfect one, but the best one. My second option was to increase the budget and step up to a 991.2. Porsche appears to have addressed this issue with the new cylinder lining process, although the cars are still of a new enough vintage that we won't really know for sure for some time. But what they've done is gone back to the older style of engine treatments, closer to the Metzger engines. The problem with this option, and I came close to it, but the car was sold before I got a chance to buy it, is that the entry price does go up considerably when you start to look at the 991.2. My third option, and I appreciated it giving me all my choices, was to go back in time entirely and find a Metzger-powered GT3 or turbo engines. They obviously don't have this problem. You'll likely end up spending more, not less, on that because of the collectability and maybe some maintenance issues. So what does this all come back to? It was in that moment in that email that the decision actually became clear. I wasn't going to pay 6 figures for a question mark, and I wasn't going to give up. I'd also emailed every Porsche dealer in Canada with a 991.1 listed, and I had one question for all these dealers and their lots. Has this particular model that I'm interested in buying been bore scoped? So about 3 or 4 got back to me, but the answer was consistent from all of them. And the answer was generally a resounding no. But what was more interesting is the overall response I received. Bore scoring is rare and typically associated with high mileage and poor service history when you do see it. That was the Porsche response. I just walked away from a 60,000 kilometer car with 4 out of 6 cylinders, rare, low miles, and bore scored. To be fair, the dealer was responsive and professional and offered to make the deal conditional on a borescope. But the gap between what the industry says publicly and what the shop says privately is worth knowing about. I followed up the response from a couple dealers with the follow-up question. I said, okay, fair enough. Let's say we do borescope the car, and let's say it does come back positive. It's happened to me twice already. And basically what they told me is if the car was a CPO car, certified pre-owned, which is kind of like an extended warranty in the Porsche program. They would De-CPO the car. And in fact, one of the cars was a CPO car that had not been bore scoped. So you could look at it as a good insurance policy on something like that. But with the CPO and whether they'd step up to the plate with a scored engine and a $30,000 to $40,000 rebuild remains to be seen. The other option, depending on how the scoring results came back, is the dealer basically told me that they would send the car to auction as rolling stock. So it's kind of a don't ask, don't tell game in this business where you just trust that the dealer's not going to sell you something with a problem. So why don't we look at a couple data points? It's a working theory. It's not a confirmed fact, but it is worth sitting with. I pulled up a few dealer listings, so let's have a look. 3 991s at a single Porsche dealer, all over $100,000, every one of them with an accident on its history. The first one, a Carrera S Cabriolet 2014, 35,000 kilometers, 10 previous owners. 10. I'm not saying these are bore scored cars, I don't know, and neither do you, but because none of them have been scoped, that's kind of the point. After all of this, buying privately was the only approach that made sense, and it seemed like the only way I could find a car with the service history that I wanted was a well-loved car from an owner. So something else came apparent to me in the dozens of dealer-based cars that I looked at. Now knowing that Porsche might send a lot of these cars to auction as rolling stock, the logical place for a lot of these cars to end up is in the used car box lot market. And it's funny because whether you're dealing with a box lot car dealer or even Porsche themselves, I've probably reached out on over a dozen cars, asked for any maintenance records and service history, and in all cases, that paperwork has just disappeared. Why I bring this up is that your best chance at finding a car with a service history is to find one that's a private sale and someone that cared for the car well. And even in my case, I didn't have a full service history, but between the Carfax and some of the maintenance history that had been demonstrated in the last 12 months, and some of the information Porsche provided me while the car was under warranty, I was able to piece together a pretty good maintenance history, at least from the private one that was for sale. So I decided I'm going to go to Vancouver and have a look at this Carrera 4S, the one that failed the bore scope inspection at Porsche, the same generation I've been navigating around. And I kind of walked in half expecting to, help me in my buying position with this car. And what I saw surprised me, and I was glad I actually went to take a look. The car was in showroom condition. I've got cars that are 4 years newer than this that aren't as in good a condition as this vehicle is. And the seller was straightforward, and we landed at a fair number where bore scoring was priced in and where some of the maintenance backlog is priced in. Just to give you an example of some of the backlog, if you're looking at these cars and they're coming up on 12-year mile markers, and if they need their tires done, and if they need their PDK serviced, and in my case, if they happen to need their air conditioning fixed because the condenser has a hole in it, which is a common problem with the front mount condensers, you're looking at about a $7,000 bill. So that by itself was some of the top up I had to spend on this vehicle just to get it back to what I'd call good road condition. Earlier in the series, when I first got the call from Porsche and I talked to the seller, I said something to him. I said, I'm not buying your car, I'm buying your problems. And I meant it at that time. But between the time that conversation took place and from the reading of the email that I got from the broker and standing there looking at that car, something did shift for me. I used to be a private pilot. And if you think about a single engine airplane, every one of them flies on an engine that will eventually need to be built. This is how they make sure planes are safe and reliable. They have an engine rating, which is the total time to overhaul an engine. And it's just a ticking clock that as the plane flies, it creeps towards. All the pilots know that, and a lot of plane owners know that. And to combat this, they often build a reserve fund, a little money they set aside every hour they fly. So for when that known overhaul's coming, the nest egg is there. What's interesting about all this is that when you assess a plane's value, the closer that plane is to its engine rebuild anniversary, the less money it's worth because you know that expense line item is coming. But a funny thing happens right after that engine rebuild is done. That plane is suddenly worth a whole lot more. Basically, it's no longer a liability. It's a known future event that you're capitalizing for. So bore scoring, bore scuffing, cylinder wear, you have to do your homework because there are varying degrees of this stuff, and I don't think any amount is a good amount. It is an inevitability that this, once it starts, this is something that you're going to have to live with. It's like living with a lifelong ailment in your physical health. But I stopped thinking about scoring as a defect that I was inheriting, and I started thinking about it as a maintenance horizon I could see coming and price it accordingly. And someday, that was the whole point of what started all this search and journey, was that maybe I will do that rebuild myself. That is one of my goals, is to be able to take the engine out of my car and do the rebuild myself. And if it's done right, this car, like an airplane, could very well be worth a lot more money in the long run, knowing that it has been rebuilt and redone correctly. So I did buy the car, the second one that was inspected and diagnosed with bore scoring or bore scuffing or whatever you want to call it. And I did drive it home. It wasn't the sunny top-down drive that I'd hoped for with my daughter in the passenger seat. It actually turned out to be a rainy, gray, drizzly drive. But having that first 4-hour introduction to the flat 6 Carrera 4S on the Coquihalla Highway was amazing. It dawned on me as I was driving it home and thinking about the car and how much I really connected with it. I asked myself, is this a car I could see rebuilding the engine in? And at least at that time, I absolutely would. So aside from finding out the air conditioning didn't work and a few other little maintenance surprises with the car, I do want to talk about one thing that did happen the next morning, because to be honest with you, it wasn't something I expected.